Anna Claire added, "He showed me that I can be brilliant without having to diminish others." John Peter, overcoming his shyness, said, "He taught me that my voice matters." One by one, dozens of similar stories were shared. Students who had found direction, who had discovered hidden talents, who had learned to believe in themselves. Dr. Velasquez listened in silence, and for the first time in years, something in his expression began to change. When everyone finished speaking, he remained motionless for several long minutes. "Professor Santana," he finally said, his voice softer, perhaps, I've lost sight of some important aspects of education." Henry approached the principal. "It's never too late to rediscover why we chose to be educators." "When I started," Dr. Velasquez said hesitantly, "I also dreamed of making a difference in young people's lives. But the pressures, the demands, the numbers, I ended up forgetting that behind every grade is a person." "You didn't forget," Henry replied gently. "You just let other values take priority. But it's never too late to get back on track." The principal looked at the students, who were still standing, and something in his eyes transformed. Perhaps, we can talk about ways to officially implement what you've been doing informally." "It would be an honor," said Henry, "but not as an employee of this school. My decision to leave remains." "But why, now that we can work together?" "Because I've learned that sometimes we need to have the courage to step outside our comfort zone to truly grow. I'm going to open an educational support center in the community, a place where any young person can find not only knowledge, but also support." Maria Fernandez smiled. "Can I help? I know I still have a lot to learn, but I can also teach others." "And me," said Lucas. "I want to give back what I received." Soon, dozens of students volunteered to help with the new project. Even some teachers offered to collaborate in their free time. Dr. Velasquez approached Henry. "Professor, you taught me something important today. I hope you'll allow me to learn more." "Education is a continuous process for all of us," Henry replied. "Perhaps you can visit our center when it's up and running. There's always room for those who come with an open heart." 6 months later, the Henry Santana Educational Support Center was operating in a simple but welcoming room in the city center. The walls were decorated with drawings made by the students themselves. There were plants in colorful pots, and a small library with books donated by the community. Maria Fernandez, now a sophomore, was helping other students with difficulties. John Peter had become an excellent Portuguese tutor. Anna Claire organized collaborative study groups. The center received young people from various schools in the region, offering not only academic support, but also vocational guidance, discussions about life projects, and artistic activities. Dr. Velasquez, true to his word, had implemented significant changes at St. Benedict's Technical High School. He created an official tutoring program, established times for individual attention, and began to value teachers who showed special care for struggling students. On a sunny afternoon, while watching Maria Fernandez patiently explain an equation to a 13-year-old boy, Henry reflected on everything that had happened. He had learned that true education is not measured by the amount of content transmitted, but by the ability to awaken in each person the awareness of their own worth and potential. "Professor," said Maria, approaching at the end of the day, "today I helped 5 students with math, but I feel like I learned more than I taught." Henry smiled. "That's the magic of true education. When we teach with love, everyone grows." "Don't you regret leaving the school?" "Never," he replied, looking around the simple but vibrant space. "Sometimes, to find our true purpose, we need to have the courage to abandon what is safe and familiar." As he closed the doors of the center that afternoon, Henry knew he had found his true calling. It wasn't just about teaching math or Portuguese. It was about seeing the unique light that exists in each young person and helping it shine. It was about building bridges between who the students are and who they can become. It was about planting seeds of hope in hearts that had often forgotten to dream. The transformation that began with a hug given to a 16-year-old girl had spread like ripples in a pond, touching hundreds of lives and proving that true education knows no bounds, respects no hierarchies, and submits to no bureaucracies. It simply happens when one heart meets another and says, "I believe in you." And so, Professor Henry Santana discovered that the greatest lesson he could teach was that it's never too late to start over, never too early to make a difference, and never impossible to change the world, one student at a time.
What if the curriculum can't be absorbed by a student who's facing emotional or social difficulties? Should we simply ignore it? We must focus on what's essential, preparing students for exams, not for life. Henry felt a mix of sadness and outrage. With all due respect, Principal, I believe that preparing for exams and preparing for life shouldn't be separate things. When I help Maria Fernandez understand a quadratic equation, I'm also teaching her that problems have solutions, that persistence pays off, that she has value. Cheap philosophy, Mr. Santana. Concrete results are what matter. And didn't Maria have concrete results? She went from a student about to drop out to one of the best in the class. Isn't that enough of a result? Dr. Velasquez slammed his folder shut. This conversation is over. I want to see you in my office tomorrow at 8 o'clock. That night, Henry walked the empty school hallways, stopping in front of each classroom where he had taught over 4 decades. He remembered so many faces, so many names, so many stories of overcoming adversity. He recalled being a young teacher himself, the son of a carpenter and a seamstress who dreamed of making a difference in the lives of others. If you've been following stories like this about the transformative power of education and human connection, be sure to subscribe to the channel to continue receiving stories that touch the heart and inspire real change in our society. The next day, Dr. Velasquez gave him an ultimatum. Mr. Santana, from today on, any contact with students outside of strict class hours will be considered insubordination. Any deviation from the official curriculum will result in a warning. 3 warnings mean dismissal for cause. Henry looked at the man in front of him and saw not an enemy, but someone who had, at some point in his career, lost the ability to see education as an act of love. Principal, may I ask you a personal question? Dr. Velasquez raised his eyebrows, surprised. Go ahead. What motivated you to become an educator? The question caught the principal off guard. For a moment, his hardened expression faltered. That's irrelevant. I believe it's relevant. We all chose this profession for a reason. I imagine you had dreams, ideals as well. My ideals are order, discipline, academic excellence. And the students? Where do the students fit into this equation? Dr. Velasquez didn't answer. He simply reiterated the established rules and dismissed him with a wave of his hand. The following days were the most difficult of the teacher's career. Each class became a minefield. He had to choose between rigidly following the curriculum or addressing the real needs of his students. He chose the latter, even knowing the consequences. The first warning came when he stopped to explain a concept differently to John Peter, who had finally found the courage to ask a question. The second when he brought a practical example of financial mathematics to help Anna Claire understand percentages. The third was being prepared when something unexpected happened. Henry's students, led by Maria Fernandez, organized a silent protest. There were no shouts, signs, or confrontations. Simply, during break time, 300 students gathered in the main courtyard and remained in absolute silence for 15 minutes. Then, each returned to their normal activities. The message was clear. They were on the side of the teacher who saw them as people, not just numbers on a report card. Dr. Velasquez interpreted the gesture as insubordination and called an extraordinary assembly. He wanted Henry to be held accountable for inciting student rebellion. It was then that the teacher made the most courageous decision of his life. "Gentlemen," he said, addressing his colleagues, the administration, and the students present,
I accept responsibility for recent events, but I cannot accept responsibility for having failed in my mission as an educator. Dr. Velasquez smiled, thinking he had finally won. So you admit your guilt? I admit my guilt for not having been able, in 40 years of my career, to transform this school into a place where each student feels valued. I admit my guilt for not having had the courage to sooner confront a system that prioritizes numbers over people. I admit my guilt for having let the fear of losing my job prevent me from being fully the teacher I always dreamed of being. The silence that followed was profound. Henry pulled out the resignation letter he had prepared. Therefore, I submit my resignation. But I want you to know that I'm not giving up on education. I'm simply choosing a different path to continue serving. Then something magical happened. Maria Fernandez stood up. Then Lucas, Anna Claire, John Peter. One by one, all the students in the school stood up, in a silent demonstration of support and gratitude. "Mr. Santana," Maria said firmly, "you didn't fail us. You taught us that education is about seeing the best in each person, even when they can't see it in themselves." The tears that Henry had held back for months finally flowed. They weren't tears of defeat, but of profound fulfillment. He had planted seeds in young hearts, and now he saw the fruits of his labor. Dr. Velasquez, faced with the demonstration of support, attempted to regain control. "This is highly irregular. Everyone back to your seats immediately." But nobody moved. The students remained standing in respectful but firm silence. It was Professor Helen who broke the stalemate. "Principal, perhaps it's time we reflected on what truly matters in education." "And what would that be?" asked Dr. Velasquez with barely concealed irritation. "To develop well-rounded human beings, not just students who pass exams." Other teachers began to speak up. Professor Carlos talked about the importance of emotional development. Professor Mariana, the science teacher, highlighted how the students' interest had increased since they began receiving individualized support. Even Professor Sonia, who had criticized Henry in the past, admitted she had witnessed remarkable transformations in her students. Dr. Velasquez realized he was losing control. "Teachers, you're letting your emotions get the better of you. We need to maintain objectivity." "Objectivity?" Maria Fernandez stepped forward. "Principal, may I share my story?" Without waiting for an answer, she began. 6 months ago, I was ready to give up on my studies. I thought I wasn't smart enough, that I didn't belong here. After Professor Henry started helping me, I didn't just learn math. I learned that I have value, that I can dream, that I can be more than my circumstances. Lucas joined her. For me, Professor Henry was the first person who noticed I existed. He taught me that I don't have to be invisible. The absolute silence of the auditorium was broken only by the echo of the words still reverberating in the air. "Gentlemen, after 40 years dedicated to teaching, I must confess that I have failed each and every one of you." Professor Henry Santana, hunched over the pulpit of the prestigious St. Benedict's Technical High School, trembled as he held the letter of resignation he had just read before 300 students, his colleagues, and the formidable principal, Dr. Armando Velasquez, whose triumphant expression barely concealed his satisfaction at finally seeing the man who dared to challenge his rigid methodologies crumble. But to understand how this moment of apparent defeat would become the greatest victory of Henry's life, we must rewind 6 months, when it all began with a seemingly simple gesture, a hug. It was a March morning when 16-year-old Maria Fernandez, daughter of a housekeeper and a construction worker, arrived in the classroom with red eyes and trembling hands. Henry, who taught basic math to the freshman class, immediately sensed something was wrong. During break, he approached her desk where she remained motionless. "Can I help you, Maria?" he asked, in the gentle voice he had learned to modulate over 4 decades of dealing with teenagers. The girl raised her face, revealing a purplish mark on her forehead. "Professor, I can't concentrate anymore. It's very difficult to study at home, and I know I'm going to fail. Maybe I should just give up. Henry sat down at the desk next to her. There were no protocols for this, only the instinct of someone who understood that sometimes a young person just needs someone who believes in their potential. Do you know how to solve quadratic equations? She shook her head negatively. Then let's start there. After class, if you want, I can teach you. No rush, no pressure. That's how the free tutoring sessions began. Henry stayed at school every afternoon, transforming the classroom into a haven for Maria and, gradually, for other students facing similar difficulties. Lucas, a quiet boy whose parents worked double shifts and had no time to help with his studies. Anna Claire, a bright girl who felt invisible in a class of 40 students. John Peter, who stuttered when speaking publicly and had given up participating in class. What began as academic support became something bigger. Henry discovered that many of his students needed not only academic knowledge, but someone who saw them as whole people, with dreams, fears, and infinite potential. He began bringing books from his personal library, organizing discussions about life goals, teaching not only mathematical formulas, but also the importance of perseverance and self-awareness. The initiative soon caught the attention of other teachers. Some, like Miss Helen, the English teacher, and Mr. Carlos, the history teacher, offered to help. Others, however, viewed this extra dedication with suspicion. "Henry's creating a problem," Miss Sonia murmured in the hallways. "The students will think all teachers should do this." But the real conflict arose when Dr. Armando Velasquez, the principal for 15 years, learned about the activities. A man of rigid posture and inflexible convictions about discipline and hierarchy, he summoned Henry to a meeting in his office. "Professor Santana, I need to talk to you about these extracurricular activities you've been developing." Henry, seated before the imposing mahogany desk that dominated the room, remained calm. "Are you referring to the tutoring sessions, Principal?" "I'm referring to the fact that you're creating unrealistic expectations for the students. Education has its structures, its limits. We cannot treat each student as a special case. With all due respect, Dr. Velasquez, I believe that each student is indeed a special case. Maria Fernandez, for example, has improved her grades in all subjects since we started working together." The principal adjusted his glasses, a gesture that Henry had learned to recognize as a sign of irritation. "Professor, you've been at this institution for too long. Perhaps you've lost sight of what's appropriate. I cannot allow a teacher to remain at school beyond express authorization." "Then I formally request that authorization." Denied. From that day on, a silent battle began. Henry offered support to students during lunch breaks, during the 15-minute interval, in the hallways between classes. He transformed every available moment into an opportunity for genuine connection. When Dr. Velasquez realized that his orders were being circumvented, he intensified the pressure. Surprise visits to Henry's classes began. The principal would arrive unannounced, sit at the back of the room, and take notes in a black notebook. Any deviation from the official lesson plan was noted as a methodological irregularity. When Henry paused to explain a concept differently to a struggling student, he received a warning for wasting time. When he tried to relate mathematics to the students' daily lives, he was reprimanded for lack of focus on the curriculum. "Every time he walks into my classroom, I feel like I'm being judged not as a teacher, but as a criminal," Henry confided in Miss Helen during one of the few moments of venting he allowed himself. "You know you have the support of most of your colleagues," she replied, "but you also know that few have the courage to confront Velasquez directly." The situation worsened when Maria Fernandez, who had become one of the top students in the class, decided to run for student representative. Her speech, simple but touching, spoke about the importance of teachers who see beyond grades, who understand the individual difficulties of each student. She didn't mention Henry directly, but the entire school understood the reference. Maria won the election by a significant margin, and her first initiative was to propose a peer tutoring program inspired by the work Henry was developing informally. The idea was for more advanced students to help struggling classmates, creating a mutual support network. Dr. Velasquez immediately rejected the project. "I won't allow this school to become a haven of complacency. Education demands discipline, not social work." It was then that Henry made the decision that would change everything. During a faculty meeting, he stood up and addressed the principal directly. "Dr. Velasquez, I'd like to understand exactly what the problem is with helping our students reach their full potential." The silence in the room was deafening. The other teachers avoided each other's gaze, knowing they were witnessing a pivotal moment. "The problem, Mr. Santana, is that you don't understand the limits of your role. A teacher teaches the curriculum. They don't provide therapy or social services."